you so much for taking the time to speak to us. It really is an honor and a privilege. It must be a sad moment for you as well, but I was reading an article in which you said that it was time for the Arch to be with his maker, with his God. Talk to us about your sentiments and why you say this.
It is a very sad time, but I did feel that Arch was ready for his God. He was ready to go. And he went, I think, probably with great joy internally because he was going to his God. But for us, we are bereft. We feel such a sense of loss. Here in South Africa, I know there is a huge mourning and personal sense of loss, but all around the world, people are feeling this. And as chair of the elders, I know from my fellow elders and former elders, very distinguished former elders like President Jimmy Carter, heartfelt tributes. And the word love keeps coming up. It's very rare, I think, very rare, that somebody who dies evokes such an emotion of love from the whole world. Imagine that. And he did that. And he deserved to do it because he gave us so much.
And breathes life into the world, as you say, because as you said, it really struck me that he's breathed so much life into us. He's reinvigorated in us a lot of values and principles that we should be focusing on. Tell us a little bit more about some of those that you learned from him, because you say you learned so much from him. You knew him long before you became chair of the elders.
Yes, I think each of us, the founding elders and subsequent elders, we all knew him. Through his very long and very full and very creative life of, so many human rights and social causes, starting with the anti-apartheid movement. But working with him then as chair of the elders was very special because he was very serious. He spoke to us at the very beginning about the importance of understanding Ubuntu. I am because you are. We are connected as humanity. We have to understand. But then he was just so funny and so, willing to sort of put on an act. For example, he loved to be bossy of Jimmy Carter and Kofi Annan and Gru Brundtland. If any of us was late for a meeting, he loved to give out, and then he would roar laughing. And in many ways, as I watched him closely over the years, especially during that time when we worked together as elders, I saw how he used humor to such good effect. He knew exactly what he was doing. He would make himself slightly ridiculous, put on a strange hat, start dancing or something. And then when people were laughing, then he would come in with his serious message, when they were receptive, when they were open. And I learned so much from that.
Was there ever a moment where the two of you disagreed on something and he used that self-effacing mechanism to bring your guard down, to get you to agree to something that you'd initially perhaps said no to or reluctant to do?
I can't really think of something that fits your question because, we were dealing with such key issues. We were dealing with the Palestinian issue. We went to Israel and Palestine. We went to the West Bank. We went to Gaza. We went to East Jerusalem. And he was always serious but hopeful, and saw the goodness on the Israeli side as well as the Palestinian side, but didn't equate them. Saw the human rights of the Palestinians very, very significantly and very openly. I was with him in Côte d'Ivoire after the elections there, when there wasn't peace in the capital. It was quite violent and people had been displaced in a churchyard. And he spoke to them with such love and soothing. We had nothing to give them. They were cold, they were hungry, they were fearful. But as they listened, they began to sit up. They began to feel their dignity and worth because he was making them feel dignified and worth his love and attention. And therefore, somehow it helped them in their terrible fear and pain. And I saw it over and over again. And the elders did have disagreements sometimes about how we would do our work. He did challenge us. I remember him using an expression which was unusual. He said, we're not punching at our weight. We're punching below our weight. We need to punch above our weight. I didn't like all this punching business, but, that was Arch. And he was always trying to get us to reach out to those who are most forgotten, most neglected, most discriminated against, and in particular, young people. I remember being with him in New York at a social good conference some years ago. And it was a conference of young people who were on their iPads and their iPhones to create a social media buzz so that we would be trending, hopefully. And this was all new language to Arch and myself. But anyway, in front of young people, he loves them so much. He shows and expresses, and his arms go waving, etc. And the journalist who was moderating us said quite sharply, "Archbishop Tutu, why are you such an optimist?" And he looked at her and he said, "Oh no, dearie, I'm not an optimist. I'm a prisoner of hope." And I remember the young people listening stopped, they really sat up at that, prisoner of hope. And I really felt how important that is for any struggle. Because if you have hope, you have the energy to go forward. You have somehow you can find the strength. If you talk about climate change, which I talk about quite a lot, you can make it very dismal and very sort of up, at the end of the world. And it is very serious. But unless we can talk about it in hopeful terms of it needing our action now urgently, but we have time, we won't be able to get there. And that prisoner of hope idea is a hugely important one in my life since then.
So I want to go back a couple of steps to when you first met, where your journey with the Arch began, because you also call him a friend of Ireland.
It's difficult because I was a student in Trinity College in Dublin in the same class as my future husband. And we became involved in the anti-apartheid campaign because one of our lecturers was Professor Kader Asmal, who became Minister for Water and Forestry in the first government, and then under Thabo Mbeki, Minister for Education. So, he was leading the anti-apartheid movement. And that's when I first learned about Arch. I watched him bravely marching in the streets. I watched in 1984 when he got the Nobel Prize. I quite honestly can't remember, but it was a long, long time ago when we first met. But I so valued that he understood the real problems of the Catholic Republican minority in Northern Ireland. They were discriminated against in housing, in education, they were imprisoned. There was a real sense that there needed to be a kind of civil rights awakening, which did happen during my student days and subsequently. And Archbishop Tutu was so quick to understand and to speak out on that issue and to help to make it clear that, discrimination anywhere hurts people everywhere. And we are part of one family. And he spoke, in eloquent terms and visited Northern Ireland and, spoke so well to people there.
And he's been lauded throughout for being non-racial, but just also be looking through the world with a gender equality prism. And I want you to learn from your experience being at the helm of your country, when we know across the world it's very rare to have women leading countries, even though the work that they do stands up just as much as their male counterparts. The kind of support that you receive from somebody like Archbishop Tutu, and what you think the future generation can take with it to continue with that work.
Well, certainly I do remember the extraordinary privilege of being present for the inauguration of President Mandela. And the night before, in the town hall of Pretoria, I was being brought up to the head of state table, for existing heads of state like myself. And I saw Arch and Leah at a table with chairs beside them. And I said, I want to go here. And I sat beside Arch and Leah that night. And that was because we were such friends at that time. I didn't want to be with other heads of state. I wanted to be with Arch and Leah. And what I really learned so much from Arch was the fact that he was so independent. He was truth to power. He was fearless in speaking out. He didn't mind if he was criticized. It was so important to be on the side of those who were downtrodden, discriminated against, felt the injustice, suffered, and the pain. And he had such empathy. I learned, and then the other thing I learned so much, and I really feel this is probably the lesson that struck home most with me, was his use of humor. You know, the fact that he would make people laugh and then come in with the important message when they were, if you like, softened up by humor, but it meant they were open to receiving a message. And, you know, when I was president, it was such an honor to be the first woman president of Ireland. I was a bit preachy. I mean, I addressed both houses of our parliament twice. And on each occasion, I made no jokes, nothing self-deprecating, just straight head-on, you know, preachy about the issues that I wanted to talk about. One of them was the Irish diaspora. The other one was about Ireland and Europe. And, you know, okay, it was quite well received. But like, now when I look back, I say, if only I had learned more from Arch about how to be open, first of all, with your audience and then speak to them seriously. You know, just be human first and then speak. And that was a big lesson for me.
Mm. Just finally, as the elders, the kind of passion projects, if it were, that he may have had within the work that you were doing, obviously there was a lot of it, as you said, was quite confounding in just how deep it was, the scars that lie beneath some of the conflicts that you are trying to resolve. Which ones would you say he'd really like you to see a conclusion to, bring an end to?
That's a hard question because unfortunately there are quite a number of them. Obviously the Palestinian issue was very close to his heart, and rightly so. I was with him in South Sudan and he spoke, he was asked to speak, it was the day before the first anniversary of independent South Sudan, and he was asked to speak at an interchurch meeting there. And he dressed up in what I call his canonicals, if you know what I mean, his formal dress, which he hadn't been in before when we were going up to the refugee camps, etc., in South Sudan. And he got up and he said, I keep hearing the word corruption. Don't speak about corruption. This is stealing from the people. I'll never forget him saying that. And there was a roar from the back of the hall of, you know, they heard him, stealing from the people. And I was sitting very close to the president, Kira, and it was quite hot stuff. And then the Archbishop who had introduced him said, and now I thank Archbishop Tutu for speaking as only Archbishop Tutu could, you know, and that was the man. You know, he spoke truth to power. And I will never feel anything but the utmost admiration for his independence, his fierce sense of justice. Yes, you know, he could put people at their ease, he could laugh, he could joke, but he was a deeply serious and especially a deeply spiritual man. And, you know, that's why people honor and love him so much.
If he were in front of you right now, and I know these are words you'll probably say to him at some point or have said to him, what would you say to him that would encapsulate your friendship, your time with him, and your wishes for him on the road ahead, so to speak?
I think I would try to thank him solemnly about how much he meant to me, and he would just laugh and he would say, come on, Mary, don't give me any of that. In other words, he was somebody who had a very light sense of his own impact on people, but we know his impact on the world. And why? Why? Because of that deep moral courage, that compass that kept him absolutely straight, the fact that he identified with those who suffered most, that he cried. I remember him chairing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I remember seeing how he cried on television when he heard some of the evidence and tried to get some of those who had perpetrated some of the violence to admit and to be humble about what they had done. And he pleaded with them and cried. And there was such strength in him. And, you know, I think the elders feel very honored that he was our first chair. We will always try to live up to the Ubuntu that he taught us so well about, and that we must now carry forward with help from so many others.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us, and we extend our condolences to you and your family as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much.